us know that we should probably have a conversation about how the board can address something like this at the legislature in a strategic way.
And I would just like to add, as Mr. Dupin said, we are going to be monitored again in October by OLS. We are monitored once a year because we have, I think we're in the top 12 of ESL students, and so those top districts in the state are monitored every single year, and our monitoring is coming again.
Or the best, or
it's the most students, and by number. So we're getting ready for that.
We're on that list. So when OLS comes to our school, because we have had Spanish language program and have the waivers in place, that's one of the pieces that they typically thoroughly investigate. And they look at everything from the legitimacy of the waivers and following the procedures with those to the presence of non-English books in ELD classrooms. And of course we've worked very hard to make sure we don't have any of those, that those are only in rooms where waivered students are. But it's taken, because our population does include a large number of English language learners, we have to be very careful in order to be compliant.
This conversation took me back to the 90s because I was a principal at Papago when we received the district grant, and we had opportunity, all people in the district had opportunity for professional development. So we were able to do some site visits. We went to Escuela Bilingue in Boulder, and there were some wonderful things going on there with students who truly were doing a 50-50 model. We saw fourth graders who had the thick trade books, and they were equally proficient in English and Spanish. There were some wonderful things. One of the things that we also looked at was the Collier research, and the Collier research at that time was looking at the rate of academic achievement for kids who were in an English learners who were on an English instruction, English-Spanish students who were in a dual language, and then kids who were just being taught in Spanish. And what we saw in those early years is that these English-speaking kids who were taught in English made the most dramatic growth. So they're, and it was looking at kindergarten through grade 12. Your students who were in dual language, they were growing, but they were growing at less of a in probably grades K through 6. They were growing at a less steep incline. When they got into those high school years, because they had been taught in both English and Spanish, and they were truly bilingual, biliterate at high school level, their scores dramatically surpassed the English learners. The challenge is that all students and all schools in Arizona must focus on the AMOs in English instruction and meet those AMOs, or they are underperforming, failing, or they're not meeting a federal AYP. That's one of the challenges that we talked about later, that kids who are working in two languages have to have some time to develop those languages, and it may not be that steep incline initially, and it depends on the strength of their first language when they go into the program. They may be having to build that first language too, and so these are all things that are taken into account because of the issues of failing schools and state takeover. And I know that sounds a little dramatic, but these are some of the things we talk about as the AMOs are now going up 11, 12 points in reading and math in every grade level until that magic 2014 when 100% of everybody everywhere is highly performing or meeting the standards. So, I reflected as I listened to this that, these are some of the challenges, and it is really, for children to master two languages at an early age is absolutely the greatest gift that we can give them, because it develops different parts of the brain, and those dendritic connections just flourish, and we know that. And so it is a shame that we can't offer
Right.
programs to everyone.
Dr. Boyle, I have a question about the research. I feel like the educators I respect show me the research that reinforces things that I already believe in. So maybe I'm missing something. But is there academic research that shows that teaching kids in multiple languages is bad, or is that just politics?
We'll have Dr. Spiller look at that. I've never heard of any research that said teaching kids in multiple languages had any negative impact. The only
Department of Education believed that the programs we were implementing did not move kids into English fast. And that was the issue. And so their way of dealing with that was SEI, and to make it as, I'm just being blunt, make it as difficult as possible to offer any other program that doesn't just teach straight English. And so that was the issue.
I'm not trying to be cynical.
Well, I am cynical because I've worked with that department for a very long time. And the motivation is not always, to answer your question bluntly, a lot of it's political.
And just could I tell one other little story? When I was working on my dissertation, Dr. Ursula Casanova from ASU, who is married to David Berliner, who's a researcher who's written several books on student growth, was a principal in New York City in the 60s when the Cuban exodus happened and many Cubans came to the United States. In the school where she was principal, there were many, many students who enrolled in that school, and they had a dual language program. Those kids had very high levels in Spanish when they entered the school, so their acquisition of English was dramatic. It was very accelerated. And so the issue, too, is that as you're working with kids to learn two languages, sometimes you have to strengthen their first language because they may not have had those opportunities as a young child to have deep vocabulary in their first language. So that, that's another thing that schools have to take into consideration. But I think I've said enough. But anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very well. You know, one funny thing that happened when I started teaching, I taught first grade in a 90-10 immersion program. So I taught Spanish all day long for my first 4 years of teaching. And that really made the difference in my literacy in Spanish. And one of the things I will never forget, two things from that first year, there were many, but two things in particular. I did a long lesson on a particular piece of literature that I loved, and I kept referring to how, in Spanish, I was talking to the kids about how we were going to plant ladrillos. And we're going to have ladrillos, and these are going to grow into beautiful sunflowers. And it wasn't until later, the kids are very tolerant, very patient, and it wasn't until later in the year that one of the kids actually clarified for me that ladrillo is actually the Spanish word for brick. And I confused it with seed, which is semilla, and ladrillo. And so, having been there and made all those and many daily mistakes as a speaker of two languages, I can attest to the power of learning that happens when you get to do it bilingually. And we try very hard to support that for kids at this school. We got here. Thank you for your time.